wanted to make a couple of brief comments opening it up, and I won't steal Chris or Mike's thunder too much. I am blessed with an incredible team, by the way, and these are just two of them. So condition-based maintenance plus, if you think about our aviation fleet, most people say, oh, yeah, the aviation fleet's already got condition-based maintenance, and it's got prognostics, got diagnostics. Not true. Depends on who you ask and what the math comes out, but it's probably about 60% of what the possibilities are for our aviation fleet that actually has CBM kind of plus in it. So we still got a lot of work to do in there. And then you think about the ground fleet, and the issue with the ground fleet is that actually when we buy transmissions and engines from all the great producers, and some of them are in this room, it already has all the instruments we want on it. We just don't buy the connecting piece to it that we can plug into to pull the data off of the vehicle. And then the big challenge that they're both going to talk about is the middleware. So the data's resident sitting there in an engine or a transmission or another component. We also have a pretty good enterprise system for data with LMP and now becoming G-Army. But that middleware, that transition from getting that data, store forward at the unit location and drawing all it together. So that's our challenge. They'll talk a little bit about that. So a couple other things about maintenance quickly. So General Sullivan mentioned 10-20 maintenance. And I grew up, and Mitch Stevenson, one of my mentors, would drive this into my brain. There's only one standard. The standard is 10-20. There is no other standard. If you slide from that, it's almost like there's no bottom to it. Where do you go? You go to FMC, you go to FMC Plus, you go to, what do you go? You go MC, mission capable, which we do sometimes with the aviation fleet. So about a year and a half ago, when we were having all the budget issues, we as an Army decided we couldn't afford 10-20. Kevin O'Connell at ForceCom is the one that has to deal with this mainly. So in hindsight, Monday morning quarterback, and we shouldn't have done this, but we did it at the time. We said, guess what? Okay, the new standard in the Army is fully mission capable for the ground fleet until told otherwise. Okay. And then we were trying to figure out what we would save, and then what would it cost us to get us back at some point to 10-20. And, this is one of those should have had a V8. Our USR reporting process that everybody reports to every month is to what readiness level? FMC. So we're watching all the readiness in the Army, and it's not moving. It's just flatlining like it was. We're like, crap, what's going on? And you think this is, intuitively obvious, but obviously in the Pentagon that doesn't always happen. There was no change. And then we couldn't capture where was the cost of it. We're deferred maintenance. So it shows one of the underlying fallacies in our reporting system of how you deal with that. So the chief said, when we started to get 14 didn't look too bad, we started to get some money back. He said, look, we're going back to 10-20. And unless, you guys come back and convince me otherwise, 10-20 is the standard. And I agree with that. That really needs to be where we are. And then you can figure out from there what that cost is going to be. But we've got to figure out in our readiness reporting processes, how do you gauge when you're moving from something like that, and what's it going to cost you to bring it back? So that's what they're going to talk about. And the other piece I would mention, and I wish Michael Williamson had stayed, because this is the point I'm trying to drive with Heidi Shue, Honorable Heidi Shue and Mike Williamson, is you got to invest in CBM Plus in a platform. And you got to invest in the IT along that way. We don't have a trail boss for it. They'll talk about that, someone that owns it. Who's the PEO and PM for condition-based maintenance and those processes? We don't have one. And Ms. Shue's trying to come to wrestle with that. But to get a PM or a PEO to invest in it, they've got so many dollars, they're going to buy so many platforms. Every time they buy something like condition-based maintenance, it's going to save you huge dollars. We've already shown that in the aviation fleet in the out years. But again, was mentioned earlier, is a PEO and PM report card is graded on how many systems they field, not necessarily how much money they save in life cycle costs. It's the age-old story. See a lot of heads going north and south. The other thing that kind of surprised me when I got to the G4 is we don't have a good life cycle model that we can plug in variables and then figure out what is this thing going to cost us over time. It kind of surprised me. So we've got some guys trying to figure that out as well, and I know there's some probably ideas in the audience. But we went to an industry, Ford Motor Company. How do you guys do it? Look at the other services, with a battleship or an aircraft carrier, their air platforms. How do they gauge that life? So we can prove to to the vice, the chief, and the secretary that, look, maybe you're going to buy less systems, but every system's going to cost a lot less if you invest in life cycle kinds of things, and CBM is a key piece of that. So we're getting some traction in CBM Plus. I'm optimistic about it, But with budget cuts, again, getting perhaps worse, I'm afraid that CBM may well be, pushed deeper and deeper. So for those that are wearing a uniform and those in DOD, I need your, efforts and best discussions as you come forward, and for our industry partners, where you have the opportunity to describe the cost benefit and the return on investment of CBM Plus. I'd very much appreciate that. So with that introduction, Chris, Mike, my advice to you is don't screw it up.
Thanks, sir. Great introduction, as usual. I'm Chris Lowman. I'm the Director of Maintenance in the Army G4. CBM Plus really falls under my area of responsibility, with great support from my teammate in the Logistics Innovation Agency, Mike Williams, sitting to my right, your left. So we've been talking about CBM Plus for a long time. We've been talking about CBM Plus in one form or another, as either reliability-centered maintenance or condition-based maintenance, and more recently as condition-based maintenance plus for better than a decade. And so when General Mason came to us and said, hey, I'd like you guys to talk about CBM Plus, I'm like, good grief. What in the world are we going to talk about that we haven't already presented to you folks? But the good news is we're at a point now, I believe, when you take a step back from condition-based maintenance plus in its purest form and look at it from an enterprise perspective. We're at a point with our ERPs where condition-based maintenance can become a reality when you couple it with the data provided, the individual platform-level data in the Material Master Record, or Equipment Master Record in GCSS Army, and the Material Master Record in LMP. And so that's really what I'm going to talk about today, lay that out for you from an enterprise perspective, talk to you a little bit about where we are in the Army relative to CBM Plus, the aviation, the ground, and some work we're doing with the Communication Electronics Command and power generation, and then some of the successes. And then hand that off to Mr. Williams to talk about innovation opportunities and where you can really plug in. So I appreciate the opportunity to not screw it up, sir. So what we like to think about in the building now is when you take a look at GCSS Army and you take a look at, so next slide, when you take a look at the investments that the Army is making in our ERP systems, and so that includes GCSS Army, of course. We heard this morning, Wave 1, we're about 30% through. Wave 2 is going to kick off in fiscal year 15, which will include the maintenance module and the tactical supply module. And so those are really the two key components of understanding down to the individual platform level where your costs are, so where you're expending your energy, and which systems in your formation are costing you the most to sustain, and which systems in your formation are costing you the most in terms of availability and impacting your unit readiness the most, and allows you to make some decisions relative to that. And then you've got GFibs, of course, which is connecting the financials to all of the logistics information. And then you have this thing called CBM Plus, which is really censoring individual platforms so that you understand and you gain visibility. And you gain the visibility you need to enable the analytics and make the necessary decisions to maximize readiness in your formation at the lowest cost. So something CBM Plus is going to provide for us. It's going to provide us usage information. So that's important. It's actionable. That usage information is actionable logistics information, and ultimately will be absorbed into GCSS Army as actionable log data. But it's also going to provide us the visibility of how the system is operating. It's doing that today in aviation. It's doing that today in our tactical ward vehicle fleet, in the subset of the pilot programs that we've enabled, which is about 2,000 vehicles. But it's giving us not only the engineering information of how it's performing, it's also giving visibility in terms of heat, in terms of environment it's operating in terms of miles it's driven versus idling. You'd be amazed when you look at the information. We structure our entire training strategy on miles driven in terms of vehicles. Turns out that our vehicles idle more than they drive. That drives a different maintenance pattern. It drives a different service schedule, right? So that's just one little piece of information. So what assets do you have? The health of those assets, usage data we talked about, operational environment we talked about, and ultimately funding. I mean, at the brigade maintenance level or the battalion maintenance level, it's important to understand from a maintenance officer's perspective which assets are costing you the most in terms of your trim dollars and what action should you take. Should you simply turn around at the sustainment level and say, hey, I need you to pull this off the line. I need a replacement shipped to me because this needs depot level maintenance. It's down more than it's up, and it's costing me 3 times as much as any other asset in my formation. So get all of that in at the battalion level. What information is important for a battalion maintenance officer, brigade maintenance officer? What type of information is important at the theater logistics level in terms of theater, maximizing theater readiness? And then ultimately enabling fleet level management at the LCMCs and the PM. Which asset should a fleet manager? So really we're talking about where we have an item manager today. Perhaps we have a fleet manager tomorrow that manages the readiness and availability of the fleet. And so they're not just moving assets around to fill shortages, they're identifying those assets that need to be pulled back, shifting from a push production or a pull production system to a push production system. Ship the unit repair cycle float to replace that asset that's causing the most in terms of readiness or costing the most in terms of dollars. Don't have the commander suffer that readiness hit, that EOH shortage. Ship him a repair cycle float, identify asset serial number 1, tell him to ship it to a depot because we're going to overhaul it or recap it. So that's critical, identifying those bad actor vehicles. Or, you know, it's not just vehicles, it's also the subsystems, the AGT 1500s that are causing him readiness problems in the tanks, the engines, the transmissions. So then ultimately what you do is you take this from a decision matrix perspective, you take all of this information and at the LCMC level or the PM level, the fleet manager now is relying on his maintenance engineers or her maintenance engineers, and they can make a determination whether this is a process-based problem. So is it a training issue at the maintainer level, or is it a training issue at the operator level that's causing these elevated failures? Or is it a material problem? Is it a material shortfall that requires redesign, that requires perhaps a modification work order, right? All of this information flows up then, is synthesized so that you can begin making very finite determinations in terms of what sustainment solution is appropriate. Should I pull that tank back and recapitalize it, extend its life for 20 years? Or should I just pull it back to do an overhaul at the depot? Or should I just dispose of it because it's beyond its useful life? There's nothing we can do to that particular asset that's going to, so that it will deliver the required availability at an acceptable cost. So we really see this as enabling not only CBM Plus, but coupled with the ERPs, giving us a complete perspective on what these weapon systems, how they're performing, and how much they're costing us. Next slide. So I think I just briefed this slide. Yeah, I'm not going to go over it too much, but LMP, as everybody knows, Logistics Modernization Program, is our sustainment level ERP at AMC, really provides AMC not only the asset visibility, but also provides them the visibility of production at our depots, at our arsenals, and so they have completely shifted over to the LMP system. That, coupled with GCSS Army, provides that tactical level visibility we talked about, really for the first time in Army history, outside of the aviation community. The Army at all echelons will be able to track an end item in terms of maintenance performed on the end item, dollars expended on the end item, and reliability of that end item from the moment we signed a DD-250 and accept it into our inventory throughout its entire life. We've never been able to do that before. That's powerful. That's powerful for logisticians, certainly in the maintenance business, to understand how you can maximize readiness, ultimately availability. What we're aiming for is offering a unit commander, a maintenance officer, the ability to assess the probability of a particular weapon system's capability to meet a stated mission. So which 5 trucks are going to be able to perform that 250-mile mission there and back without breaking down? That's really what we're after here in terms of the prognostics, and is the plus in CBM Plus. All right, next slide. So an overview, essentially CBM Plus is shifting us from a scheduled-based maintenance. General Mason loves to say that if we maintained our POVs as much as we maintained our tactical vehicles, they'd be broken too.
Knew where he was going. And by the way, Larry, I don't know if you've gotten the task yet, Larry Weich, but he sent the task back to AUSA and trade-off. You go look at that. They, you know, when you open up the manual, the 1020 manual on a vehicle, what does it say? The first thing it says in there is tighten all nuts, bolts, and screws, check all fluids and fill as necessary. What does Private Mason do? Cranks every nut, bolt, and screw down, and breaks battery cable and all that stuff, and it goes and fills the fluid and blows out every seal in the machine. It doesn't fail. I mean, I'm being facetious here. So the question is, do we get away from this, you know, pre, during, post PMCS we've all grown up with? Again, my point is, if you mess around with your POV, you know, pre, post, and, you know, during PMCS, damn vehicle being shot all the time too. I don't know where that right sweet spot is. We're wrestling with that, thinking about when we rewrite our manuals. CBM Plus will be an indicator to help us with that. So in one sense, it's very, you know, simplistic, but it has wide-ranging implications in terms of, you know, maintenance force structure and all that other stuff. We don't want to, you know, screw around with too much, but we're putting some thought on it. And again, I think Graylock and AMC are the right people to look at it. But it'd be interesting to see, you know, industry thoughts. You look at how the trucking industry operates in the United States. They're pretty much there on CBM. They can see their vehicles. They know what's going on with them. You know, they can figure out when a guy's idling or not. Do a lot of electronic stuff. We're as great as the United States military is. We are in the stone age. We've got to get there with some investment. Again, we're kind of at the leading edge.
Thanks, sir.
It's a big question. Yeah. Maybe we can spend our time and money training on other things. Don't know. I mean, I don't know where this will come out, but I think it's an interesting thing to try to figure out.
Right. So right. So that's a great point, ma'am, and that's one of the major areas that we're discovering the value of CBM Plus. The second area, though, is where we have scheduled removal of parts, especially in aviation. What we're finding with the aviation censored platforms today is that we're able to extend the time on wing. And so for high dollar value items such as engines, transmissions, rotor blades, I've got an example on a Sprag clutch. What it's allowing us to do is assess the the allotted time on wing, call it 1,250 hours for a sprag clutch, and say, you know what, this sprag clutch does not have to be a mandatory replacement part at 1,250. It can last till 1,500 with very little risk. And all of those parts replacements, all of the inventory that is built due to that demand pattern driven by the mandatory parts replacement can then be affected. And so there's real value here in oil changes, scheduled services on tactical wood vehicles. You know, we still own about 250 some odd thousand trucks, and they're required by the lube orders to change that oil, regardless of condition, regardless of use. It's a time-based scheduled service. And so what CBM Plus is allowing us to do is now extend that scheduled service in the lube order. And once we get to a point where all of the tactical wood vehicles are censored in terms of oil condition, then it will be on condition. So the truck then will tell the battalion maintenance officer, hey, I'm going to need an oil change in the next 2 weeks. And he can begin structuring his maintenance program appropriately. So very similar to those of you who drive modern cars today. My wife drives a Buick, and it tells her, hey, you got 10% left. You've got to get an oil change soon. And so she needs that, and I need that, and so that's great. So that's the condition-based maintenance. So what you know, I get asked all the time, what is the plus? And the plus is really the prognostics piece, and that's understanding the engineering data that's coming off the sensors, the vibration, the heat, the amount of use. And when they begin, the engineers then begin detecting where they have variables, either changes in vibration patterns or heat patterns, that what's happening is the engineering community at the LCMCs and our RDECs are now notifying the unit. Say, hey, tail number 0005 is showing an anomaly in the tail rotor block, box. Ground it and remove and replace the transmission or whatever we're talking about. And so it's providing real value here. And then ultimately, again, we talked about how does this enable a fleet manager. And it really enables a fleet manager and AMC to begin transitioning from a pull production system to a push production system. So in my business, in palming for depot level maintenance and understanding what my requirements are going to be over the next 5 years, it helps minimize some of the variables. It helps me understand what my op tempo is going to be, and as a result, how many trucks, tanks, Bradleys, Strikers, you name it, can I expect to see over the next 5 years at one of our organic industrial base facilities or at one of our contractor partners. Really, really powerful. Next slide. I'll just go quickly. I don't want to. Excuse me, sir? Oh, absolutely, sir. There's none of these changes are done without safety input, especially in the aviation community. Absolutely. Yes, sir. All of the changes that the engineers are postulating go through the full gamut of engineering assessments. So we talked a little bit about maintenance procedures. It's not just about maintenance procedures and the ability to move away from this kind of scheduled maintenance process regardless of condition or use. It also gets to you to mission command. We talked about that. How does a brigade maintenance officer, a battalion maintenance officer, how does the theater commander understand in real time what his readiness is, not just on the 15th of the month? Will those 5 Strikers be able to do a 4-day overwatch mission, primarily idling on a mountaintop as opposed to rolling 250 miles, right? So that's the probability. That's the plus part of it. Configuration management. This is not just a CBM Plus capability. This is really GCSS Army helping us understand down to the end item level how every single one of our major platforms is configured. You'd be amazed at how much we don't know in our ground fleets today. Aviation is locked. They have to have that for their airworthiness surveys. Ground, though, like General Mason talked about this morning, primarily considered a truck. Anybody could hang just about anything they wanted to a truck without updating all of the configuration of the end item. We've just called it a component of the end item or associated support items of equipment, drilled a couple of holes, mounted a installation kit, ran some cables to the battery, and we're off and running. What GCSS Army and CBM Plus now give us is an ability to understand down to the cable how that particular asset is configured. Very important. And then, of course, business intelligence at all echelons. And this is really where industry can help us better understand where CBM Plus, from a business intelligence perspective, coupled with GCSS Army and LNP, can help our decision-making process. What information is important at the battalion level versus the fleet level, or the theater level, or the brigade level. It's different. The decisions at each echelon are different. And so the data you need to make those decisions are slightly different. And so we could really use your help in better understanding that capability. Next slide. About 85% of the aviation fleets configured today with sensors. We're getting an enormous amount of data off of that. AMCOM is doing a good job along with MRDEC, the Aviation Research and Development Center, understanding what that data means, what data is really important versus need to have versus good to have. Wheeled and tactical vehicles, we've cleared the hurdle of a cost business analysis at the Department of the Army. So that's validated. The department has said there's value in CBM Plus, and now we're going to go forward, begin to identify and target fleets, and implement the capability. What we found over the past year and a half, we censored about 2,000 vehicles, implemented that from foxhole to factory, the data flow. And what we found, many of our tactical wood vehicles are censored to some degree today. Right? They come from the OEM sensor. We don't always enable the sensor, it's there. These are normally commercial diesel engines, commercial transmissions. They come censored because the industry demands it. And so all we really have to do is enable those sensors and develop. There's a gap today from the platform to the sustainment level. How do I offload the information from the platform? How do I store it at the platform level? How do I parse the information? What's engineering versus logistics type data, actionable logistics data, and then how do I flow it back? And so we're going to Miss U on the 2nd of June for that decision to assign a PEO. And then mobile electric power, also complete, pilot program's complete, and our cost-benefit analysis is chopped at the headquarters level. So that's another area that we'll be focusing on, enabling the CBM Plus sensors. Next slide. Just a couple examples here. We talked a little bit about the Apache Sprag clutch. That's a censored asset. As a result of the censoring, the Airworthiness Authority was able to extend the life of that Sprag clutch. It was a mandatory replacement item regardless of condition at 1,250 hours. The Airworthiness Authority extended that to 1,500 hours. That alone, just that one component, equated to about $12 million per year in reduced demand, reduced inventory, and reduced maintenance requirements. And then on the tactical wood vehicles, starting at the bottom, right now we are required on our heavy tactical wood vehicle fleet to do about 6,676 oil changes per year. If you went and changed that and did it per the IETMs, about 3,500. If you went to the baseline using the oil life algorithm, you get about 3,167. So all told, you reduce costs for scheduled services just in the cost of oil by about $3.6 million. So we've got proven results on condition-based maintenance. I think it's a critical enabler in terms of what that synced with the ERPs in developing this data-enabled logistics system. And it's critical, I think, to Army 2025 to understand where our cost drivers are, where are our expense centers, what's costing us the most to operate, what's costing us the most in terms of availability, and addressing that before it becomes a problem and we have to recover it mid-mission. I'll pass it over to my battle buddy here in CBM Plus, Mr. Williams. Right, so the answer is yes, sir. So that's the challenge we have. So right now, we'll get after, General Mason's tasked us to take a look at increment 2 of GCSS Army. One of my tasks to my group is to understand what it would take to absorb the actionable logistics information from the CBM Plus sensors into GCSS Army, how to divorce that from the engineering type data that just needs to go back to the Lifecycle Management Command. A battalion maintenance officer is not going to be able to deal with heat and vibration data. But usage data, ONS cost information, availability information. So this is really where I need industry's input. At the various echelons, what's important to a battalion maintenance officer versus a brigade, a division, theater, LCMC? How do I parse that information? How do I array it in a business intelligence tool, which is different at every echelon, depending on who's looking at it? What decisions does he have to make, and what decisions does that person, what data does he need to enable those decisions? So there's a lot of discussion going on, and that's a very good question, sir, and I don't have a great answer.
And that's a good transition point. What I'm going to talk about is some of the CBM Plus innovation opportunities that's out there. Next slide, please. You know, I was counting this morning during the morning presentations the number of times that innovation got mentioned. You know, and being the director of the Logistics Innovation Agency, I hope General Mason doesn't hold me accountable, you know, to fix all the things that, you know, the challenges that we identified. But in this area, I mean, I'm going to walk you through, we're looking at what we can do at the platform level. Spent a lot of time, one of my smart guys back there, Ken Beam, you know, worked that middleware piece, the data information exchange piece in the data delivery network. And then how do we use that data that we can pull off from the sensors, you know, at the enterprise level and really leverage the ERPs that we've made those big investments in? So when I talk about system analysis and design tools, talk about wireless, I'm a big fan of that. We really haven't leveraged the power of wireless capabilities that exist due to security issues, network issues. We'll work through all that, and I'll talk a little bit about that. The standard speeds, sometimes we forget. Someone had mentioned business enterprise architectures earlier today. We kind of forget that there needs to be standards and protocols and things like that so that an Abram talks to the enterprise, the log enterprise, the same way a Humvee does, the same way an aviation platform does. And then a little bit on, you know, big data analytics and some of the work that's being done in the predictive analysis and in a new area that we're exploring in terms of discovery analytics. Because one thing, our analytic force structure, CAA track, you know, Center for Army Analysis, TRADOC Analysis Center, AUSA, our big analysis activities have been reduced about 50% of their manpower. So how do we use, you know, system software to kind of fill that gap where we lost analysts, you know, in our engineering personnel? Next slide. So at the platform level, one of the things the PMs have complained, you know, that what we haven't provided clear direction on the Army's expectations. So we've partnered with ASALT, Wimpy Pybers, and, you know, and his folks, and actually put together a acquisition manager's guide to Chloe, the logistics operational enterprise, CBM Plus, and kind of how they grade themselves as they go through a requirement. How do you know what CBM Plus capabilities that you can pull off the platform that you can get, and we can make some intelligent decisions about how much sensor data we need to pull off the platform, how much we don't need to pull off the platform. And so my staff has gone out, we've been to TARDEC, we've been to CCOM, and gone through some drills to see how, you know, we work that piece to gauge, you know, what capabilities are really, you know, gaining by, you know, pulling the sensor information off the platform. Next chart. That's not a good slide. And Chris talked a little bit about prognostics, and I see prognostics, you know, right now when you look at your left-hand side, my right-hand side, what we're currently doing is pulling diagnostics and doing prediction analysis at the fleet level, at the enterprise level. Not doing it as well as we could, but we are building the ERPs and fielding the ERPs so that we can get there. But that's a capability that we have or that we're building today. Doesn't require huge investment. It's just leveraging what we already have. And what we call this is the low-hanging fruit. Where we want to go in the future is right now prognostics can only be done at the enterprise level. Some of you who recall the Future Combat System, where we are actually looking at how did you build prognostics or those algorithms on the platform. so that the platform could actually calculate things like, you know, its useful life, you know, when parts would, you know, when you need to get a repair and things like that. But, I mean, there were huge challenges with Future Combat System. The initial estimation was about 15 million lines of code to perform those algorithms and those calculations. By the time the program was terminated, we were up to about 60 million lines of code. I mean, it is hard. But, you know, I believe it, as the Honorable Ms. Hsu, you know, states sometimes, is, do we need to invest in that technology, or do we wait on industry? Because right now that capability doesn't exist in industry. So I think we need to be careful on the promise that we make with prognostics and see where the industrial base goes. Next chart. As I mentioned before, one of the big efforts as part of the Army 2025 and beyond is how do we reduce soldier tasks. And, you know, our wireless, someone had mentioned earlier today, you know, the Internet of Things. I mean, we are basically there. Many of you have seen the commercial where, you know, a gentleman's at his log cabin and stuff, and his kids come, you know, to join up with them. And, you know, he asks that they turn off the TV and shut everything down. Yeah, Dad, we took care of it. He goes on his smartphone, sees that they hadn't done all that, and he could do it because of the Internet of Things and capabilities that we're developing. We need to leverage that capability with our platforms. And so I want to show you a little video as we look into the future on how you can create, you know, digital arms rooms, digital motor pools, so that when, or a digitized fob, so as you came back to an operating base or to your motor pool, it immediately, the vehicle self-assesses itself and downloads that data, you know, through our information systems to our ERPs. Can you tee up the video?
Has sponsored the development of a wireless sensor mesh network protocol for monitoring Army equipment. A wireless mesh network can be established using two basic components, the mesh node and a fixed mesh gateway. A wireless sensor mesh consists of mesh nodes connected to Army equipment and mesh gateways connected to the NIPRNet. These components interact with each other and other mesh nodes to create a wireless sensor mesh network. A wireless mesh network was used for vehicle tracking in an operational program in Kuwait and in easily covered areas exceeding 1 square mile. A key feature of LIA's wireless sensor mesh is its security, which includes FIPS certified AES 128 encryption of all data at rest and in motion. In addition to the data encryption, mesh nodes have also been FIPS 140 certified as crypto modules, ensuring that security features of the mesh nodes cannot be disabled or otherwise compromised. Using this security, the mesh nodes remain silent until they are in range of an operational mesh gateway and receive an encrypted signal, at which time the mesh will form automatically. The security features also ensure very low power consumption. Battery-powered mesh nodes will normally last over 4 years on one set of batteries, while supporting a node-to-node wireless range of 600 feet. To form a wireless mesh network, mesh nodes seek out other nearby nodes and calculate the least cost connection path based on an algorithm that considers distance, signal strength, and already established relationships, as well as other factors. Each node establishes parent-child relationships at least cost to form the most efficient mesh possible, linking any node that comes into range of the established mesh. Mesh nodes move their data to the mesh gateway. The gateway gathers the data coming from each of the nodes in the mesh and can feed the data to various communications devices ranging from computers on a network to Iridium or cellular data services. The critical piece of the mesh node is a small commercial off-the-shelf chip, which operates the wireless sensor mesh protocol software. Depending on the desired functionality, this chip can be added to other circuit boards to allow many possibilities for data collection, data transfer, and translation, which can then be moved via the mesh chip to the mesh network. This video shows how a HEMTT equipped with a wireless sensor mesh radio returns to the motor pool and rejoins the wireless mesh network. This specific vehicle is equipped with a wireless sensor mesh node mounted in tandem with an Applied Research Laboratory Mesh Interface Board, or AMIB. This configuration allows for the automatic movement of usage and fault data to the gateway as soon as the vehicle is in range of the active mesh network. Using the viewer, an engineering tool used for development and testing, we can see the active mesh before the HEMTT's mesh node connects to the mesh, and then see how long it takes to join the mesh after returning to the motor pool. We can see that the vehicle rejoins the mesh network and reports status messages in approximately 4 minutes. Typically, a vehicle can rejoin the mesh network more quickly when the mesh network consists of a larger number of nodes than in this small experiment. At the unit level, and specifically within the motor pool, automatic transmission of vehicle usage and fault data supports the functionality shown in this demonstration dashboard, which displays actual data from censored Army platforms collected wirelessly in a motor pool. Here is a motor sergeant's dashboard, which displays the self-reported status of vehicles within the motor pool. Any captured fault codes are identified in the health status column with a red circle. In current operations, usually the operator's last action after a large mission is to turn in his vehicle and accompanying usage and status information. This is the maintainer's last look at the operator, who rightfully is anxious to rest or celebrate another mission completed, while it is the maintainer's first look at the status, faults, and usage of the vehicle, which must be ready for the next mission. Providing timely and accurate data automatically as the vehicle returns to the motor pool allows the maintainer to triage, apply resources, and question the operator hours before current processes allow. In summary, automating the collection of data that already resides on most Army vehicles using available technology will augment routine health and usage data collection, provide high-quality data, and allow for the timely triage of the vehicles. This capability will clearly be a combat multiplier.
Can you go back to the charts, please? And so that's one of the ways we're looking at how do you leverage, wireless technology to, really reduce, because right now, a soldier has to take, his or her maintenance support device and plug into the vehicle to download the data. I mean, with today's wireless technology, you don't have to do that. You shouldn't have to do that anymore. Next chart. And we've been talking a lot about what happens at the platform and stuff, but however, as Chris had stated, the real benefit of CBM Plus occurs when the data is shared throughout the platform. General Swan had asked, how are you working through parsing, what needs to be done, for the operator, the battalion maintenance, the supply sergeant, the battalion maintenance officer. So right now we're just working the data flow piece, seeing which information needs to go where. There's been several cost-benefit analysis to look at the value added and the types of data that needs to move at each of those levels. So we're working very closely with General Weiss's folks at CASCOM, General Christian's folks at Army Material Command to sort through that. Next chart. And, everyone's a lot of discussion going on with big data analytics. One of the things I've challenged my staff with is as we roll out these ERPs, they're going to produce levels of information and data that we've never had to deal with before. And so the question becomes, what do you do with all that data? And the ability now to not just get structured data, spreadsheets and stuff like that, to handle unstructured data, to handle transactional data. Like you see every day when we go into the stores, they know our spending and buy habits better than we know them. How do we leverage and use that so that we can instill that trust and confidence in the supply chain so that I know things that when I order something, a part, that it's going to get there. So we're just on the infancy of this. I had mentioned earlier one of the promising discussions I've been having with some of the folks is on discovery analytics. Again, one of the challenges that the management commands, when I talk to their ILS folks, is that they just don't have the systems engineers that we once had in our force structure to do all that, hand jamming analysis, mulling simulation and analysis and stuff. So how do we develop capabilities that allows them to leverage technology to help us better manage our fleets? Because our footprint's not growing. And so how do we use technology to really see or really, gain the real value of what CBM Plus, provides to us? Next chart. And while we spent a lot of time, I had my staff add this chart on, on the maintenance side. I would contend that, what we're learning on the maintenance side could be expanded into supply, with IUID and the things that we're gaining, in-transit visibility, distribution, transportation, operational energy. How how do we leverage the power of the ERPs that we're fielding, G-Army, LMP, and stuff, and collecting this data and making decisions on it at all levels in the supply chain. And I think next chart, that's the last chart. I wanted to leave some time for questions. As you can see, we're, even, I guess I'm a glass half full person. I mean, I think that there's enough capabilities out there in CBM Plus that we can start leveraging some of the capabilities, even as budgets, and things go down, because a lot of the platforms, as General Mason had mentioned, they come with the sensor data. So, I mean, at its minimum, I mean, we can have a soldier go to a vehicle, download the data, and pull it into the ERPs. Very manpower intensive, but we can still leverage the power that sensors will provide from the vehicles. But there are other, opportunities that are out there, and we're working with, industry and our government partners to explore that. And, lastly, we just need to, I had mentioned it, we just need to leverage the emerging, what industry is doing in terms of, I mean, as Chris had mentioned, you don't check your oil. Many folks don't. I don't check my oil, after every long trip anymore. I depend on those sensors to tell me if my oil's low and things like that. I mean, we've got to get to that with our tactical wheel vehicles and our combat vehicles. And with that, we'll move on to some of the questions.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Let me just reiterate what I opened up with. We've been talking about it for 10 years, and everybody in this room has heard it. CBM Plus is not a panacea, but I can tell you we're entering an era right now with the successful fielding of GCSS Army, the success of LMP and GFEBs, where we have an opportunity to take advantage of what's already censored, take advantage of what we can afford to censor, in our newly acquired systems, what the requirements require the OEMs to censor, and successfully implement CBM Plus, not only at the tactical level, but throughout our business process, so that we've got the right skill sets at every echelon to understand what CBM Plus is telling you and what actionable decisions you can make from that data. So it's very powerful, very exciting to be in this seat right now, in this period. And we're hoping we can pull it off. So I got a couple of questions, and I'll take the. Mike's got one, and I've got two, so I failed. Okay, so the first one, both to Mr. Williams and myself. So the question is: realistically, it appears the best the Army can do is to apply CBM Plus to newly acquired platforms or systems as they're introduced. If the Army hasn't been able to fund CBM across the fleets in 13 years, as you've had big budgets, how can we expect that we can fund it in the future with lean budgets? And that's a very good question. So as you look across our major acquisition programs today, CBM Plus, it's in the requirements documents. JLTV, it's in the requirements document. The PIM, it's in the requirements document. Abrams ECP, in the requirements document. When you look across our legacy fleets, the question is how much can you afford to spend per vehicle, and how much is enough? And so when we looked at tactical wood vehicles, at 250,000 tactical wood vehicles, you can't spend a lot of money per tactical wood vehicle to censor legacy platforms. And so what the community had to decide is where would it provide the most value? And so we said, well, we won't address the light tactical wood vehicles now. We'll let that happen during the as we modernize the light fleet. But medium and heavy, they're sufficiently large enough in terms of capital investment for each vehicle that you can afford to spend $1,500, $2,000 per truck. So that's what the tactical wood vehicle pilot has been all about. What should we censor? What do we need to censor? And what data is really important? And so what TACOM, to their credit, has been able to do, identify where the vehicles are already censored. They started with a suite of sensors that was very large, censoring everything, revolutions on the wheel, heat, temperature, everything, incline, decline. And what they came away with is most of that doesn't provide value. And so they've shrunk it down to a very small set of sensors, less than $2,000 per truck. And so what we're focused on is a couple of different resourcing strategies. One, of course, in the modernization path, getting those requirements programmed as part of the modernization program or the new acquisition program. And then in the legacy fleets, entering in a modern service line so that we can begin to censor some of these legacy fleets. And if we can't do that, if that's not affordable, at least enable the sensors that are already embedded within the tactical wood vehicles. Mike, I don't know if you want to
Okay, yeah. No, you hit it. In fact, this, just to get through all the questions, the question for me was, given that wireless sensor mesh technology is a key enabler for CBM Plus, where does the fielding of wireless sensor mesh stand? Is it funded? While it is a key enabler, what we did was separate, we didn't want, General Mason, we had the discussion, we didn't want capabilities-based maintenance plus to be hampered, by tying it to our wireless, sensor mesh, development stuff. So I think we're going to go a long way in the decision that's going to be made by ASAL to, one, identify a PEO, a program manager for CBM Plus, and then we'll start working the wireless solution that enables, us to get at some of the innovation opportunities that exist. So we have identified the unfunded requirement. We know what it costs, the additional R&D dollars associated with, delivering the capability, getting the security protocols. We didn't want this to get in the way of CBM Plus moving forward.
Okay, I've got one. The idea, so this is for me, the idea of sending a commander a repair cycle float implies that the Army has a national/depot level maintenance program to provide those floats. Are you comfortable that we have adequately identified those national maintenance requirements? Will those requirements be resourced? So another very, very good question. So over the last 12 years, the Army has gotten out of the business of both operational repair floats and repair cycle floats, two different types. But because of the environment we've been in, those are really peacetime enablers, and we've largely done away with them. And consequently, our requirements stack within our SACS file has also eliminated. While there is an element of the requirement stack for repair cycle float, it has systematically been eliminated. So a couple of years ago, one of my mentors asked me a question. He said, Chris, what are we going to do with all of the capital assets that come available as a result of force structure changes? And this is General Stevenson, always thinking a couple years ahead of me, for sure. And I said, we're going to offer them up for FMS. And he goes, well, why wouldn't we take a look at examining the SACS file and the requirement stack, identifying a repair cycle float and authorizing it so that when we restructure the Army and these assets become excess, the item managers capture those assets and populate a repair cycle float. So we've done that. We spent the last 2 years systematically going through every single combat vehicle, tactical wood vehicle, and major air defense type system, and identified a repair cycle float. And then we've gone back and said, okay, well, once we get all these repair cycle floats, what are we going to do with them? And so AMC is working with us to identify the inventory management principles that go behind a repair cycle float, because it's different, right? You have to, once you build this inventory, you don't want it to be a static inventory sitting at Anniston Army Depot, rotting out in the back 40. What you want it to be is a dynamic inventory that turns a couple of times a year, that's enabling your depot maintenance program. So they're working through that. We've enabled our information management systems to identify an ownership purpose code. So the item manager says, okay, I know that I have 32 repair cycle floats in A condition sitting in Anniston, for example, for Abrams, or wherever it's appropriate. So it's a different management philosophy, But all of this is designed to enable the ability for AMC fleet managers to begin managing readiness as opposed to reacting to readiness. Very good question. So essentially what General Stevenson drove us to is a no-cost way to populate repair cycle float for those assets that are becoming excess.
And then CBM Plus can allow you, the Army, to see those platforms at the battalion level that are the dogs, the ones that are costing you the most. And he can identify, Chris can identify and say, okay, I'm going to send you 5 floats, they're not going to become your vehicles.
Right.
You send me the dogs, and we'll put them into the depot maintenance program wherever they fit. Right.
So it's a no impact to readiness for a unit commander. Because, you know, as all of you know, in the past, what would happen is once you identified a tank, for example, for depot maintenance, you would do everything you can to keep that tank. You'd patch it, you'd fix it, you'd spot weld it. You wouldn't turn it in. But now what we're doing is facilitating this painless transaction, maintains your readiness, helps us manage fleet availability and fleet readiness at low cost, and frankly, it reduces the variables in terms of depot maintenance planning. Hope that answers the question.
So here's another question. What are the emerging platform sensor data standards that industry and the Army/DOD can work together on? One of the things that we don't want to do, especially on the automotive side, is to create mil-spec, military standards. And that's what we want to go away from. Now, where it gets a little challenging will be as we want to pull sensor data off of, ammunition, usage, weapon system performance and things. That's because there won't be, commercial standards that exist for those types of things. So that's where we're going to have that discussion with industry is how do you build standards for those military unique things that we will censor in the future, to understand ammunition consumption, weapon system performance. So right now we're focusing on the automotive aspects. There are, ISO, SAE standards, open system architecture standards that we are leveraging. We're not creating any military standards for that. But it'll get a little problematic as we start looking at some of the other things that our weapon systems do. The second part of the question was middleware has been problematic in many large-scale programs, leading to costly, recurring ECPs. Standards typically lead to lower cost than middleware and lends to faster tech insertion and innovation. I agree. In the logistics community, we don't have too many success stories of developing our own logistics software platforms. One of the reasons we've leveraged ERPs and SAP and things like that. But we did, we leveraged some existing work that had been done for the JDMS, the Joint Data Management System, based on what the aviation system had done. So, yeah, a little problematic. How we're going to maintain software, who maintains it, a lot of questions that we're dealing with and still having those discussions. Does the hardware owner, like for the maintenance support device, does the, PMDE, who owns the device, do they also own the software that rides on that device? So we're having those discussions right now as we put more automation. We don't have that discussion with Stryker. The Stryker PM, owns all the software that's on Stryker. We aren't doing that yet with some of our log information systems. So we've got some work to do and some discussions.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.